Rob Zastryzny is a left-hander, just signed with the Pirates, but has spent parts of 4 major league seasons with the Cubs, with the Mets, with the Angels. Has a World Series ring that you probably don't wear around all the time. You probably have that in a nice, secure place. Native Canadian playing for Team Canada in the World Baseball Classic. And a former minor league mate of Taylor Davis and major league mate of Taylor Davis. So, Rob, appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I was a major league teammate with Taylor to end it, I think. So that's good. That's all I care about.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I was
not where you
tight.
start, right?
Exactly.
What have you done for me lately?
It's what have you done for me lately, league, and that's what we have done lately.
Yes.
100%. So you're about to hop into WBC ramp up, right? You are hopping into, and we were just talking about it before we hit the record button, but you are on Canada's roster. You will go to Phoenix. You'll play at Chase Field. That pool, you just said Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Great Britain. How freaking cool is that to be a part of the World Baseball Classic?
Yeah, I'm definitely pretty excited. I'm kind of fake Canadian. I was born in Canada and then I moved to the US. So everybody.
And then he moved to Texas. He went like the exact opposite route.
Yeah, no, and my parents wanted coastline, and they were like, okay, where can we live on the coast where it's super inexpensive? And they chose Corpus Christi for whatever reason. And everyone down in Corpus calls me Canadian. They're like, dude, your accent's whatever. And then I go play for Team Canada 2 years ago, and they're like, oh, what's up, cowboy? What's up, cow? And I'm like, no, great. I don't fit in with either one.
So my mom, her parents got divorced when she was young, and she lived half her life or half of her like year in Alaska and half of her year in Texas. She would tell all the kids in Texas that she lived in an igloo, and she would tell all the people in Alaska that she rode a horse to school.
No, I mean, you can definitely get away with it. They're so far apart that neither one knows what the other one does.
Yeah.
Right. And nobody from like those worlds is ever going to cross over again. Right.
Yeah.
Unless it's at like a wedding or anything like that, they'll never see each other. So you can get away with as many lies as you had. So did you have any great lies about like being a Canadian when you did grow up in Texas?
No, and to be honest, this is gonna sound bad, but I was a little bit ashamed of it because they made fun of me so much. I was like, oh, like I don't even like Canada, whatever. And then I played for Team Canada, and I loved it. Like the guys were the best and everything. And I remember my first bus trip there, I was starting against the Japanese team, and I was like just kind of getting locked in for my start. And they go, get Rob Z to the front of the bus, and I was like, oh, great. So I walked, and they're like, sing "Oh Canada," and I was like, all right, I know like 7 words. And I got like through the 7 that I know, and by then the entire bus was like belting it out like crazy. And dude, it was like that moment. I was like, these guys really like take this seriously. They love the country, obviously, and I've been bought in ever since.
So did you see the Crown Royal commercial during the Super Bowl, like saying pretty much everything that Canada has given the United States?
No, I did not see it, but was I on that commercial?
You were not on that commercial.
Should have
I'm
been.
sorry.
Should have been.
Me and Justin Bieber and Drake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are the 3. That's it.
That's pretty much what I could list if I was off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's the only 3 I got. I think Ryan Gosling's from there too.
There
But
we
we're,
go.
we're like the same guy, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he's
Perfect.
not quite as pretty.
Correct.
So you just mentioned that somebody called you Rob Z. Zastryzny. Do people call you Z? Like how do people go about that?
So how effortlessly you just said it, I know you did your research because that is not an easy one to get your first time.
Well, I just cut it off the top of the pod, but I called you a right-hander. So
That is true. So you get the hard part, and then the easy part that's on the playing card you can't get, which is fascinating to me. So funny thing about my last name, I couldn't say it till 4th grade. I had a lisp when I was younger, and I could not say it. So I was the one who started Rob Z. I wouldn't let anyone call me anything else, and I couldn't say it, and then it just stuck from then on out.
I didn't even know that story. That's cool.
Man.
I do know that it is funny because like guys that would come up, like when we were playing together in Iowa, like guys would come up and they'd be like, hey, like how do you say his name? Like, how do you say it? And like if somebody said his name right every time, Rob like, wow, good for you. You said it right. Nice. If he didn't say it right, no, that's not it. Try again. Come later.
Well, what I've started doing, because I've been on so many teams the last 4 years, is no matter what anyone says, I just say yes. So like, oh, it's Zastryzny, huh? And I'm like, that's it. And so I have so many different pronunciations of my name because I've just said correct to all of them. Because I don't think there's any worse feeling than like, hey, it's Zastryzny, and they try to say it again, it's wrong. I'm like, no, Zastryzny. And I just feel like I'm like directing them through a 1 vowel word that shouldn't even exist. So I just say yes, no matter what.
So what I will say from like an announcer perspective is don't say yes to whatever, because like we're super sticklers about that. Like we want to get it right. And we've interacted with so many dudes. Like I've talked to so many 50, 60 somethings that are like TV and radio voices, either at the major league level or the minor league level. And, there's like this really complex name. They'll ask the guy like, hey, I have you right in front of me. How do you say your name? And they'll try, they say yes, and then they learn like they've been saying it wrong for the last like 5 years. So don't let any like TV or radio guy get away with that.
So there are certain people that I will correct, and that's the TV and radio guys. But I do have a good story about that. I'm about 2 weeks into my debut. I get called up August 19th, and about 2 weeks into that stint, and we go to Dodger Stadium, and I get to the clubhouse. I'm unpacking my bag, and Len Casper walks up to me, and he goes, "Hey, there's someone out there who wants to talk to you." And I go, "Okay," assuming it's like a friend of mine or someone I know that works for the Dodgers or whatever. And it's Vin Scully.
Yeah.
And I know his voice, and that's how I recognized him, but I didn't really recognize his like face. And plus, like people in person look a little bit different. And he goes, "How do you say your last name?" And I told him, and he like walked me through it 2 or 3 times. And I told him the exact name, and like he asked like 3 or 4 questions about me. And he used every single bit of information I gave him in the broadcast. And it was just incredible. His record, like he didn't write any of it down. He just stood there, nodded his head, and dropped every fact that I had on myself that I dropped in there in the game broadcast.
That's cool.
Is he a legend for you, Jack? Like, is he the peak?
I mean, like, yeah, he's Vin Scully, right? Like, I grew up, obviously the generation before me was very like Vin and all that, but I caught the tail end of Vin and I was super in on that. But I love that you mentioned Len, because like Len and Pat Hughes were the guys that I grew up with. Like I would listen to Pat Hughes on the radio and all that. So, but obviously you guys came up together. You finished at the Bigs together in Chicago. Taylor, what are your favorite Rob Zastryzny memories?
Well, before we get into that, I do want to make one note about the World Baseball Classic thing, because we talked about this, Jack, with Austin Bryce, about how like Rob, I'm sure, was in a really tough spot to make a decision on if he even wanted to pitch, because Rob's trying to make a team, right? Like Rob was in the big leagues up and down last year. For the first time in a few years, he really put something together. That's a kind of guy that shows up to camp that like we talked about. Rob's going to get to go throw in front of people, and he's going to be on TrackMan, and it's going to be everything, but he's not necessarily throwing in front of the Pirates guys. So like, that's a guy, I'm sure, Rob, for you, like that was probably not the easiest decision, although I'm sure like everybody wants to pitch for their country. Like how cool is that? But like at the end of the day, the most important thing for you is making that Pirates team.
No, you're exactly right. So when I was with the Angels last year, they called me like the second last day of season and said, "Hey, keep your calendar open. We want you to play." And so I went up to Perry Maniason. I was like, "Hey, I want to do this, and I don't know what's going to happen this offseason, but I want to do this. I want to check it with you guys first." And he was like, "Dude, absolutely, go play." And so I was all gung ho until I got non-tendered, signed with the Pirates about a week later, and I asked them, I was like, "Hey, like, the decision just became a lot harder for me. I want to play. Before I signed my contract, I'm letting you guys know I want to play." And the first thing they said was, "We'll be able to evaluate you more watching the World Baseball Classic than we will in spring training." He's like, "That's the closest thing you're going to get to big league reps." And I mean, some of the environment will be like big league playoff reps. And he was like, "We will get everything we need to see from you in the World Baseball Classic." But I also couldn't imagine, like, if we go to the next round, you miss another week and a half. And if you go to the championship round, you miss another 3 days. And it goes from, hey, I'm going to miss 9 days of camp, maybe 2 outings, to I'm going to miss 5 big league camp outings or 6 big league camp outings.
Yeah. Right. All right. So, yeah, let's jump into favorite stories. So,
and then we'll get back to the WBC, because I do want to ask about Canada and the roster there.
No, finish it. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm just thinking like this is a great roster. And you talk about missing 5, 6, big league camp outings. You actually could be looking at that, because you got Freddie Freeman on this team, and you got guys like Pivetta and Quantrill and Matt Brash, and you've got great prospects like Naylor and Edouard Julien. What's your experience with like this roster, and how good do you think this Canadian team is?
So the time that I played, a lot of the pitchers couldn't play. It was right after season, and like Quantrill was young. Pivetta had thrown like 180 innings, so a lot of those guys backed out. This is the first time we've kind of had the pitching staff. Like Brash is in there, like you said, and Pivetta and Quantrill are starting. And it excites me a lot. I know Votto, Bo Naylor or Josh Naylor, it's Josh Naylor, and a guy named Charles LeBlanc all backed out because of either injury or because of the situation or whatever. Yeah. And having those three guys in the lineup would have helped a ton. But I've been reading up on that Julian kid and a couple other guys, and like there's some there are some really good baseball players. Like, and the other thing I like about our league, it's a lot of guys who have a lot to prove. So it's going to be a lot of guys going out there and putting it all on the line. You know, like we got a lot of guys who are trying to make their club, a lot of guys who are trying to like playing for Team Canada for the first time and everything. So I think the energy is going to be there for sure.
You ready for story?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, I'm just going to lead up to it. But, well, actually, you know what? Let me start with this. I thought one really cool aspect of Rob's career, like probably the wildest ride to get to the big leagues in like of 16, like high pick out of Missouri, you know, moved up relatively standard, right? Like pretty much level to level, whatever. But it was like starter, gets hurt, but not arm, gets hit in the foot, gets turned back into a starter, gets turned into a reliever, turns into a long guy, turns back into a reliever, gets to the big leagues. I tell everybody this because I just remember this. And like when Rob first got called up, I remember reading an article on MLB.com or somewhere, and it was a quote from Joe Madden after the Cubs had traded for Aroldis Chapman, talking about how Rob was going to get some save opportunities in that bullpen. And it was just at the time, you know, Aroldis was the best that arguably had ever played outside of Craig Kimbrell, and Mariano, obviously. But anyway, cool ride. Rob, you have to tell the World Series story.
Okay, I know this is Taylor's favorite, and it's one of my favorites too, because in the long run, it doesn't matter, but it was at the time, it was incredible. So we win the World Series, we go back to the clubhouse, it's jam-packed. Like, you can't move anywhere. And so I'm like stuck between a group of guys, I can't remember who, and they have all this, the plastic up covering all the lockers, right? And so guys are spraying bottles and stuff and like hitting everything, but the plastic's covering absolutely everything in the clubhouse. Like there's like a game machine in there, they have it covered, they have everything covered. And so I don't have a care in the world, happiest, cloud nine, whatever. And I kind of wander towards my locker and I see that the thing is down. Like the draping covering my locker has fallen down. And so only my locker is exposed. And it's 20 yards from me. And I am watching champagne being shot into my locker. And I cannot get around enough people to get there. And people are just like, I remember it was like Tommy Hotovy and those guys are like just shooting champagne all over. And it's just going into my locker. And so I walk over there and I go check, and my headphones are ruined. My cell phone is dead. I don't know if it's even going to turn back on. Everything is absolutely ruined. My outfit to wear on the plane home soaked in champagne. And so in the middle of this World Series celebration, arguably one of the best World Series wins of all time, I'm tracking down a clubby to put my laundry in so I can make the flight home. And it was so funny to just like.
And I just can't imagine, like, you couldn't talk to anybody. You had no cell phone. Like, look, talking to our parents, like, I mean, you couldn't make any of those phone calls, which honestly, I'm sure your phone was blowing up to the point that it might have been a little nice there. But like, dude, I'm married. If you were probably engaged at the time, dude. Like, if I'm winning the World Series, my wife knows what's happening in that clubhouse. I'm not going to be able to talk to her and tell her that for the rest of the night. I can't imagine that. And like, the whirlwind of emotions that had to be going through your head. And Jack, it was torn down because somebody wanted to get better pictures.
Dude, I forgot that part of the story. I watched the guy tear it down.
Oh,
he's up on the bench getting a better shot, and he couldn't like get his arm to hold the camera, so he tore down the thing in front of my locker so he could move his arm into my locker to take video.
You should have like billed him for the suit.
And then so I was upset, but whatever. I just remember now the worst feeling was going to my phone, having it be off, and knowing that like I went to my locker as soon as I got there, and I was like, should I grab my phone to video this celebration? And I was like, you know what? No, I'm gonna
live it.
Moment. I'm gonna live this moment. I don't need my cell phone. And I come back 5 minutes later and it's destroyed.
Sure enough, you didn't need it.
I did not need it. And thankfully, I have my wife's number memorized and my parents. So I called them, made sure they were good. And then I was like, whatever happens the rest of this week, who cares? My phone is dead.
Right, I'm off the grid. Walk me through the timeline of like, okay, you guys win the World Series. Obviously, everybody sees like on Fox, you see the cameras in the clubhouse, all that. What happens after that? Like what's that period from winning the World Series to parade?
Let me give you an interesting tidbit before he gets into that, because I wasn't there, but I heard this story that I'm sure you've heard this story, Rob, but this was told to me by it might have been the traveling secretary at the time. I don't remember who told me this story, but apparently this is so pre-rain delay, pre-Rajai Davis home run. The Indians staff was fixing the Cubs clubhouse, getting it ready to get. They were prepping it for the thing, right? They're in there. Everything's getting tarped up. All the champagne's getting done. Apparently, like Rajai hits the homer. The Indians clubhouse guy looks at his phone. Everybody, we gotta go. We gotta go. They all leave there to go do the same thing in Cleveland's clubhouse.
Yeah.
Interesting tidbit. All right, sorry.
So along those lines, last year with the Mets, I played with Carlos Carrasco, who was, I believe, hurt at the time. He didn't throw, or maybe he was coming out of the pen. I can't remember if he was, but I talked to him because I remember being in there in about the 7th inning to go talk to Kyle Hendricks, and they had everything wrapped up. And then I went back out, lived that disastrous home run moment. And so I talked to Carrasco and I told him about like them taking all the stuff out of our clubhouse. And so when they went and put it in their clubhouse, there was like 2 or 3 guys, including him, that were like, get this out. Like they were freaking out. And like the whole rain delay, they were like getting the stuff out of their clubhouse. So it was like the awful moment for us after the homer as they're taking stuff out. And then the awful moment for them as they're taking it out. So we both lived it. And like that crew had so much moving around to do that game, because that was the craziest game that I've ever seen in person by far.
Yeah. I mean, dude, and we just relived the Dexter Fowler homer, right? Like he's with Marquee now. So, I mean, that game just brings so many memories back to, I think, every baseball fan. And you didn't need to be a Cubs fan. You didn't need to be an Indians, Guardians fan, whatever. It's just like that was the pinnacle of baseball. So being in the dugout for that, what was that like, riding that roller coaster of emotion? And then I want to ask you about the timeline from winning to parade.
I will never forget, and I hope he doesn't get mad that I say this, but I was sitting next to Albert Almora, who ended up having a monster role in that game after we had that combo. And I'm sitting there, and the homer goes out, and it's a loud stadium, but for some reason, like when it's quiet in a dugout, Taylor can tell you this, like even if the stadium's erupting, you can hear the silence in the dugout. And like Albert is just sitting there looking at it, and he's just leaning over the rail, and I just look at him, and I look back, and he goes, maybe this curse is real. Because it was just one of those like unbelievable. There's no way that should have happened. Like I'm sure if you looked at Rajai Davis's stats in a 2-2 count against lefties, he's got like 2 career homers or something crazy. That was the most. He was choked up. I mean, I didn't have something to pull up. He had this much bat underneath his hands. Like he wasn't even attempting to hit that ball out of the infield.
I remember watching Chris get ready to throw the ball, and for those who remember, like Chris slips, and I specifically remember thinking in my head, this would be the most Cubs thing of all time if he throws this ball away, and that's how they lose that game.
Yeah, if we lose that game because Chris's foot slips on like a fairly wet grass after a rain delay, and I tweeted it the other day, it was like 5 years since the World, not the other day, I guess a couple years back, it was 5 years since the World Series, and they posted the video of Chris, and I just like tweeted like, I still have a panic attack whenever I see his foot slip. And it got like thousands of favorites because everybody, when they saw the foot slip, because the camera followed and it looked like that ball was overthrown. I still panic even when I see it now. It's like, how did that ball stay in Rizzo's like?
Dude, that's terrifying. So walk me through that timeline. You guys win the World Series. What happens next?
So after we win, I'll go from carrying David Ross off the field. Like they let him leave. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Like just because we had talked about it for a month, they were like, if we win this thing, we're like carrying you off the field and you're retiring. And so that happens. We get showered up. It's a kind of a blur from there to the plane. And then I remember the plane being an absolute like riot. Like guys were running up and down the aisles. Like the trophy was being passed around. Everyone was kind of taking a picture. So we land. I think it was Arrieta goes, I'm going straight to like tacos and tequila or whatever the restaurant was. And they had like the entire fire station, police crew in Chicago there to greet us when we landed. It was all cool. And then you guys are going to laugh at me, but I texted our travel secretary. I hadn't been home in like a full calendar year because I was instructs, January camp, November camp. Like I didn't leave. I hadn't seen my parents in like a year other than them coming to see me. And I just wanted to go home. So I texted our travel secretary and I go, hey, is the parade mandatory? Not because I didn't want to go, but because like I was thinking about like going celebrating with the boys one more time and then like bouncing early, or like taking an Uber straight from the parade to the airport or whatever it would be. Like I just wanted to go home, and I was like trying to get my travel stuff, and I was going to leave that night. And I remember him texting me back and saying, whatever you do, don't leave before this parade and make sure you enjoy the parade. And I don't know, I've seen some parades where it's just like a couple streets, right? Like you see a couple streets full of people and you're just like, oh, that was fun, and like give the fans are the best fans ever, and you wave at them and everything. And I remember when we were leaving Wrigley on the bus, it was kind of like that. There was like a couple thousand people like all around, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I had no idea that the parade hadn't even started yet. Yeah. And then when we got to downtown, I didn't see pavement for 35 minutes.
It was one of the top 10 largest human gatherings of all time.
Yes.
And I'm not joking with you. Like I actually did not see pavement. Like, because from our double-decker bus, you can't see the road you're driving on, and every cross street was filled with people as far as the eye could see. And I still to this day think that's more jarring to me than actually playing, because baseball's our job. Like you can ask Taylor, like you get nervous, you get the fight or flight stuff, but in the moment you're playing the game.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that I said, like looking back at it, you know, I think a lot of us probably scoffed at this, and we probably, you know, I look back at it like a little bit of me is probably like the dad in me, but the regime that ran the minor league system that came over and started this kind of like, I believe there was this massive change that occurred in Chicago. Like there really was. It started at the bottom, and it was all about just believing. It was believing that it could happen. And they started this comment. And like, if you go look at old pictures, I'm sure you can find t-shirts that say this, but they started this comment that was when it happens. And it was such a cliche thing. And like, all of us kind of looked at each other when we first heard it, like, come on, dude, like when it happens. Well, then in 14, the team kind of starts winning. Then in 15, they get to the playoffs, and you're like, when it happens. And then I specifically remember showing up in 16, and without being asked to, guys on the team were talking about what the parade was going to be like. Guys on the team were talking about that. We're ready for it. There was a belief. There was an understanding that it was going to happen, that we were going to be the last team on the field at the end of the season, and that's all that mattered. And so, like, when you go watch that Game 7, everybody's pumped. You go watch the parade. Like, it was crazy how many people were there, but so many of those guys were prepped for that. You guys were ready. The organization had done such a good job of teaching guys that that's what it was about. And like, I so wholeheartedly believe that the game has gone analytic, which is a great thing. You have to create the best players possible. Yeah. But at the end of the day, none of it matters if you don't win Game 7.
Yeah. No, and I'm completely with you. That team, I talked to people, like I talked to Rich Hill today, and he was on the Dodgers teams that were all really good and stuff. And I was telling him about the Cubs team, and the only thing I mentioned was it wasn't the most talented team I've been on. Like I was on the Mets last year. That's the most talented team I've ever seen in a locker room.
Right.
It was just like everybody did their job all the time, and they knew their role, and they believed that they could do anything in any given situation. Like Schwarber coming off the ACL, believing that he can hit 500 in the World Series, like stuff like that. David Ross coming out of the pen, catching Lester in that game and hitting a homer. Dexter Fowler leading the game off. And I remember the last thing that was said in the rain delay before he went out to the field was Hayward said, Schwarber's going to lead us off and we're going to get going. And Schwarber just straight up told everyone, he's like, when I get on first base, then we go. And like 2 pitches into his first at bat, single. And as he's jogging down the line, he's like fist pumping. Like we knew it was going to happen. And
that it was such a real thing that it almost happened prior. And like, you know, the we had Chicago had, and like I will, man, I really wish we could still talk to this man because he's passed. But Ken Ravizza was our mental skills guy, and he was one of Joe Madden's biggest advocates. Like they both were together for so long, and man, like he was able to just explain and make it so real. At the beginning of every spring training, he sat out 162 baseballs and then 3 baseballs, 5 baseballs, 7 baseballs. And he said, look, here's where it is. All you got to do is win this amount of games. All you got to do is win this amount of days, and like broke it down and made it seem so realistic, made it seem so real. And like that team, I think you're absolutely spot on. That team was one of the best combinations of youth, young stars, older guys, older stars, and veterans that were just wanted to win, because there was the group of guys that at the end of the day, the goal was to win. And I tell people this all the time. If you don't worry about your own numbers, if you worry about helping the team, at the end of the year, your numbers are going to look fine. You go look at that 2016 team, all those guys' numbers looked fine. They were good years, right? Obviously, we've talked about Chris Bryant having that monster year. But Chris Bryant is probably the least selfish baseball player I've ever played with. Like, he wants what's best for the team. No doubt everybody wants to do what's best for them. But, like, by no means was he going out there every day like, man, this is all about me. You know, like, it was such a cool atmosphere. And it was the total package for Chicago.
So was that like the Madden philosophy? You know, from the outside looking in, everybody saw Madden as this eccentric guy that loved wine and had the Benny's deal. Like it was just great seeing the cool guy as the manager. But what was Joe Madden, the manager and the guy in the clubhouse, like?
I like Joe a lot. I think he does a good job. His philosophy is kind of, if you feel good, wear it. Like he always says that. If you feel sexy, wear it. If you want to do something, do it. Whatever. And he kind of lets the clubhouse sort itself out. And so in a situation like 2016, when you have David Ross, John Lester, John Lackey, and those guys policing the clubhouse, you have a bunch of young guys like Addison, Javi, Chris, and all those guys that are doing what they say and doing their job at the same time. It was a perfect storm, like Taylor said, of we're doing whatever we want, and whatever we want is winning. And then
there's 2 things that I'll always say about Joe. One, when I met Joe for the first time, I thought that like what you see, like I thought exactly what you thought, Jack. You see the hippie, you see like this guy out there doing all this stuff. I'll be honest with you, like the first time I met him, what you see out there is he's real. Like that's real. When you go, like as a player, you walk by his office, he's got his hat backwards, listening to some old rock music with an aromatherapy diffuser going. Like that is Joe Madden. But the biggest thing I'll give Joe Madden in Chicago, and I don't think this gets talked about enough, honestly, and like Rob, you can speak to this too, but Javi Baez does not become Javi if he doesn't play for Joe Madden. If he plays for anybody else, Javi Baez does not get to do that. And I'll even double down on that by saying before Javi made his debut, Joe flew to Puerto Rico to watch him play, to say, I want to learn who Javi is. Like, that's such an underrated aspect of being a manager. And man, you know, like Rob said, though, like he had, you know, I think, what did he say? 3 non-playoff teams. He had 3 meetings a year. If you were a playoff team, you had a 4th. Like, it was truly like, look, I'm going to have my group of guys that I trust to run the clubhouse. If something happens, I'll fix it. But the reality was, dude, he's a player's manager, but he did it the right way.
Cool.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the point that I agree the absolute most is the Javi thing is 100% true. It's like if Javi comes up in an org that is trying to repress you as a human being, it's hard for him to come out of his shell and be the player that he is. And that player is the guy who makes stuff happen, right? Like he would make a mistake, or Wilson's another great example. They would make some base running mistake, and Joe would understand that, hey, that's going to happen with the way that they play. And it was never like, hey, come talk to me after the game. It was, hey, I love the aggressiveness. Keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what you said about Joe on the field and like on cameras and everything that was what I was most impressed about is the first year that he was there and I was watching him on TV, he's got a glass of wine at his press conference and whatever. I'm like, what happens when, pardon my French, this shit hits the fan?
Yeah.
Like, is he the same guy? And he is. He handles stuff.
Yeah.
He's super genuine. 90% of my meetings with Joe were terrible. I got sent back to the minor leagues, right? And every single one, like the first two, he was like, hey man, whatever, like you're going to the minor leagues, it's over. After like the third or fourth time I got optioned, he was like, hey, this is a tough role. He's like, I'm your manager. I'm telling you to go to the minor leagues. And then that meeting would be over. Like Theo would be in there, Jed would be in there. They'd be like, hey, you're going to the minor leagues, whatever. And after that, Joe would talk to me like a human being. He'd be like, man,
yeah,
he gotta be tough.
He was really humanizing. He was an easy person to talk to. You know, you hear a lot of managers that are like, hey, my door's always open. His door literally was always open. Like he was very available. You know, I think some people question his decisions. Like I think a lot of people question what he did with the bullpen, obviously.
Yeah, but it was baseball decisions. It was never like this
right.
guy, you know, is mishandling this.
Right, absolutely. And like, you know, I think that a lot of it came down to like, man, you wanted to win and he wanted to win. And like for a lot of the team, that's what it's about. Like when you're on a good team, you know, Rob was on a couple good teams last year. Like that's what it's about, wanting to win and nothing else matters. And he perpetuated that feeling for the team.
So obviously wanting to win and helping a team win, you have to lean into your specific role. And Rob, your role has almost like changed. It's been on and off occasionally. You've gone from starter at Missouri to reliever to swingman type, then starter, then reliever. You do pretty much everything that's asked of you, whether it's in a bullpen role or a starter role. You've changed teams a good bit over the last couple of years. When you have these conversations with teams, do they almost like lay out what they want you to be, or is it, we'll decide what we want you to be and you're going to roll with that?
So it's changed over the last 2 years. Taylor kind of caught me right at the very start of me changing as a pitcher when I was with Baltimore. And I had the elbow fracture and it sidelined me for about 7 months. But that was when I turned into like a four-seam changeup guy. I started being able to strike guys out. I started being able to throw the ball a little bit harder. And I'll never forget this. And like, I don't have any bad feelings toward any team I've been on. Like every team I've learned something from. The Angels was one of the most instrumental things to my success because I go into the clubhouse and I sit down with Phil Nevin, I sit down with Perry, I sit down with everybody and I go, I'm whatever you need me to be, whatever. I can blend into whatever role you need. Just let me know what you need from me. That's how I've always been because that was my role in Chicago. And that was my role with the Mets too. They're like, we need you to go long. Like I started for a good portion of last year as well, just because the Mets were like, we might need length, whatever. And that's how I played. Perry sat me down at my end of the year meeting and he told me to cut it out. He was like, you're good. You need to realize you're good. He's like, you can be a one inning guy. You can pitch till you're 35, 36, no problem. But if you keep this, like, I'm going to try to blend into whatever you want, it's not going to work out for you. So he was like, go to wherever you're going to work out, throw the ball hard, keep throwing your slider, and tell whatever team gets you, or if you're with us, that you want to be a one inning guy and you want to get saves and holds and all that stuff. And he was like, tell us what you want to be. Don't let us tell you what you want to be. And so this was the first free agency I went into where I told the Pirates, I was like, hey, like I can go 1 to 2 innings. I throw a changeup, I can get righties out, whatever it is. I was like, but I want to be in the big leagues and I want to throw meaningful innings for this team. And
I think that's like a significant part. You know, we've talked about this before on this podcast, but like I think a big change that's occurred since both of us got in was, you know, we all came up in this era of, look, I'm a starter. I got to get through 5. I got to get through 6. I got to figure out how to do that. I got to set guys up. Now, the game today is throw as good as you can for as long as you can and come out of the game. Yeah. So, like, setting yourself up as, hey, I want to be a high leverage guy. If that means that I get 5 outs today, that means I get 5 outs today. The reality is I want to go as good as I can. And when you notice that I'm starting to falter, you get me out of the game. Like, that is where we're at. And I don't think there's, honestly, unpopular opinion, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, that's how you see the most talent coming out of the bullpens, coming out of starters. Because look, man, like, when baseball started hundreds of years ago, it was the bullpen were the bad starters. They were the failed starters, right? And I don't think that like kept on, but for a really long time. I mean, so what? Like the 90s?
No, dude, I mean, more recent than that, like failed starters turned into good relievers, right? Wade Davis, an example of that. Zach Duke, an example of that. Like they're littered and they're still around, to be honest.
Honestly, they're everywhere. But the reality is now is that like as a hitter, you're all like it used to be like, hey, like the meetings used to be, hey, see pitches from the starters so that we can get to the bullpen. Like we want to get to the bullpen. And now it's a similar philosophy, but the reasoning is totally different. Because in 2012, it was, hey, see pitches from the starters so we can get into the bullpen because the bullpen's not as good. To now it's see pitches from the starter because we have to get those bullpen arms throwing 3 times a series so they're tired at the end. Because those are the best arms in baseball. Yeah. You saw Kyle Schwarber just said, I don't know if, I think Just Baseball Show said it, or no, I read this. They asked Schwarber about playing the Dominican. And he was like, his one big comment was, dude, this is a bunch of closers in that bullpen. That's going to be fun to deal with.
Yeah.
Like basically the winning teams, are closers. There's 5 closers on these teams. Like the bullpens are just so different than they were even 10 years ago.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. I think you're going to start seeing a big shift because I trained at Push Performance this offseason, right? And there's a lot of big leaguers there. Dean Kramer, guys you play with, Kyle Bradish is there, like Walker Buehler trained there, whatever, all these names. And the big league bullpen velo board is like 95 Dean, 94 this guy, Rob Z, 91.8. Then it's like the college kids, and it's like 99, 98, 97, 98. And the back end of the bullpen is hard to hit now. And that's why I think like the platoon guys are kind of finding their way out. Is like, you can hit a lefty, that's great. You're going to have a job. But now all the lefties coming out of the pen are disgusting. So you're not getting any more soft tossing, like I'm trying to get through 2 innings lefties, like force contact. It's every lefty you face is coming in and throwing 95 and doing all that stuff. So it's like your job became that much harder. Like what Tommy La Stella did for the Cubs, that job is so much harder now because it's like even the 8th guy in the bullpen that's just eating innings is the closer in AAA with 97, 98 in the tank.
Right. The guy that I'll talk about that we both played with was Pat Valaika. I always give so much credit to Pat Valaika. And I'll be honest, like I think Pat Valaika got a really bad, I don't know how to say this. Like I think he had really bad luck. I think his timing was bad because if you go look at Pat Valaika's career, his biggest year was like his 2nd or 3rd year in Colorado. But the majority of his bats were off the bench. But he was hitting homers. He hit like 16 homers one year in Colorado, majority off the bench. The issue there was he was a young kid. That's really hard to have a young kid. Tommy La Stella was the same way. And it's extremely difficult to ask those guys to go, hey, because the next year after that, Pat did the same thing and the Rockies weren't winning. So the issue became, hey, now I'm keeping you on the bench because you can win us the game, but now you're hitting every 4th day. That's not okay. That's unbelievably hard to do because when you come in, you're facing Edwin Diaz. You're facing Liam Hendricks. You're facing Josh Hader. You're facing these guys. It's not like you're going in and facing a soft tosser. Like you said, like you're facing the best guy on the staff.
Yeah. Well, and one of the new splits that I know that a lot of front offices are looking at, and I know I'm sure you guys are looking at, Taylor, you especially as a hitter, is obviously you're looking at platoon splits, right? How does this guy fare against right-handed pitching? How does this guy fare against left-handed pitching? The new one is how do guys fare against high velo? How do guys fare against 95 plus? And that's what you see. Like from the 5th inning on, from the 6th inning on, that's what you're seeing in major league games, right? You're seeing 96 to 98. Rob, have you felt like any pressure to change who you are as a pitcher with like the pillars of pitching? It feels like changing over the last 5-6 years.
Yeah. So I completely changed. It was one of those things where like I was kind of a crossbody lefty specialist guy and that job got eliminated, right? There's no more lefty specialists in baseball. And so I went to a guy and I revamped my delivery. The only frustrating part is I went from like a 89, 92 guy that could touch 3-4 on a really good day to now I can sit 93, 94. But that's still considered slow because it's
Which
like,
is so weird. Yeah.
if I threw 94 as a lefty in 2017, they'd be like, dude, this guy is a flamethrower. Like when I got drafted, they're like flame-throwing left-handed pitcher. My velo has not changed. And today at the lunch table, they were like, Rob, you wouldn't even get pulled over for a speeding ticket with your fastball anymore. It's like, man, it's gone up. Like my velo has creeped up every year, and it's just like the games creeps up, mine follows. The game creeps up, mine follows, and I can't like get above it.
I got two things for you. One, me and Rob both played with a guy. He's been on the podcast, but like we talked about facing guys in games and how like historically you'd look in the bullpen, you'd go, oh, this guy's not throwing 98. Okay, sick. I get to face this guy. Pierce Johnson's a guy where you see this guy coming in, he's not going to throw 98, but you do not want to face him because you don't want to see that breaking ball, right? Like if you get to the breaking ball, you're out. The other thing I want to say is like I will give MLB some credit because I think the bullpen stuff has gotten better because of the 3-batter minimum.
Yeah.
Like you've got to be better. And that doesn't mean that baseball as a sport has gotten better. Like I think having Oliver Perez, having Trevor Miller in the game, there was like that. I really liked that aspect. I think that created an extra piece for managers to have to deal with. But I think the overall stuff in the bullpens has increased because you're going, okay, look, he's got to face, no matter what, he's going to have to face an opposite side hitter.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you, and it brings value to guys who can do it. And I remember being in the bullpen last year. They had Aaron Loop, who just absolutely devastated lefties. They had Jose Quijada, whose fastball devastates both sides. And it's like the game has changed now to where Aaron Loop, me and him were talking about it, they're taking away the shift, right? He's a ground ball heavy pitcher. And so he's got to adjust the game. And them not having lefty specialists anymore, he had to learn how to get righties out. And it's like Aaron Loop's 35 years old. He's had a lot of success in his career, and he's still adjusting to stay in this game. And like those are the guys that stick around forever. And I kind of like the guys who have to make adjustments. Like I had to. Like I couldn't get righties out at all once I became a bullpen only guy. And now it's like I love when righties step in. I'm going to attack you with my changeup. I'm going to attack you with a fastball up, and we're going to go to work. And like you're exactly right. The average bullpen guy has gotten better because they've had to adjust or they've been gone.
Yeah, like I mean, even you, right? Like you were a quality starter because you had a really good feel for pitching. When you go to the bullpen, you can't feel for pitching. You're not setting guys up. You're seeing guys one time. It's got to be the best of the best. So like that was a change for you right away. You had to figure out on the fly, like, hey, I got to get these guys out right now. There's no, hey, I gave up a couple hits, I gave up a run, that's okay. You can't do that. Especially not in the big leagues, especially not for the Mets, for the 2016 Cubs. Like, you can't do that for really good teams. You got to figure out how to get zeros and get zeros fast. And, like, those guys, like you talked about, Aaron Loop, man, like, that guy's had a lot of success for a long time. He was one of the best relievers in the game a couple years ago. Like, you're right. The fact that guy going to have to figure something out is crazy. But those guys tend to figure it out. Those guys tend to put it together and go, look, like, I'm a sinker baller. All I got to do is figure out how to get the guy to hit the ball a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. And I'll tell you what, man, some of those guys are so incredible at doing that. Kyle Hendricks is one of those guys. Like, I believe half the pitches that Kyle Hendricks threw, he'd go, okay, here's where this guy's going to hit the ball. Like, you know, like, and Rob will attest to this, but I, you know, and I preach this, that like Kyle, to me, I don't know that I've ever seen a guy that studies hitters more than Kyle Hendricks. And I find it so funny that he's deemed the professor because truly, like, that dude studies baseball, studies hitters more than anybody, to the point that, like I said, I really think he throws the pitch and he goes, all right, this ball's going to be a ground ball to Javi. All right, this ball's going to be a ground ball to Zobrist. Like, he knew when he let go of the ball where the ball was going.
Yeah, there was multiple times when he won the ERA title in 16.
Yeah.
There was multiple times that year where we'd be in the bullpen watching him and he'd get through like 2 or 3 innings. And like the veteran bullpen guys would like kick their feet up and they'd be like, he's going 7 or 8. And it was just like he'd lead off 110 mile an hour line drive back up the middle. and it'd be like within 3 pitches, there was a ground ball to Zobrist. And we knew it was coming. They knew it was coming. The hitter was trying everything he could not to do it. And it just flick it to second base, double play. And Taylor, it's got to be so fun catching a guy like that. I think Alec Mills is another one. It's got to be.
Dude, Alec Mills was the first interview on this podcast. And that's so funny you say that. Because, like, one thing that Kyle and Alec do very similarly that you kind of did as a starter, you don't do now, is Kyle throws 3 pitches to the same spots, whether you're a righty or whether you're a lefty. Alec, very similar. You're going to get a fastball, changeup, slider if you're a righty, a fastball, changeup, curveball if you're a lefty. So you know what you're getting, and he's going to just throw them in better spots than you should. And both of those guys, you're spot on, man. Like, it's so fun watching those guys go about their work. It's just fun because, like, that's the puzzle. That's the chess game. That's the game calling that you hear about, that, you know, which, like, going into game calling, man, like, I hope at the college level and you're dealing with it, right? Like, you've thrown to a lot of guys that have come out of college. That's one aspect of this game that's changed, is that catchers don't necessarily have quite the understanding of calling games. No offense to them and no problem of theirs. It's just because they don't get to do it. College coaches are doing it, and I can't really blame them. These college coaches are making millions of dollars a year because they're winning. So, like, if I'm a college coach, I'm going to call pitches. I want to try to win. But, like, you're hindering that guy's production. You're hindering that guy's growth. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see with the pitch comm what happens, because are we going to get to a point where, like, there's a guy in the bullpen, there's a guy in the dugout signaling to both of them?
So that was my question. We actually talked about it today in our meeting. Was they're like, teams are messing around with, like, the pitcher being able to call it. So it's like sitting on your wrist and you can call your pitch and everything like that. And dude, for me, watching a really good catcher, and I was spoiled because I had you for so many years. Like, I thought Tim Fedorovich was really good. I like all these guys. The Cubs would always bring in one really, really good catcher.
Christian Jimenez.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are just like, not that, like, you all could hit and everything, but it's like, it didn't matter. Like, you guys brought so much value to the team, even if you went up there and punched out 125 times in a row. And watching that spoiled me, because this year I played with the AutoZone for about 2 weeks. And it's like 2 strikes. These guys are popped up, ready to throw. And it's like, there's no more catching. Like, and
nope.
I like the consistency of the zone. Like, once you know where a zone is, I think it's very advantageous to pitchers. Same with hitters. Like, if you control the zone, then you're good with the AutoZone. But for me, like, there's so much beauty in watching a catcher work that I can't ever not have that in the game.
Well, and your arsenal is so clearly art of pitching, so I'm sure you appreciate art of catching as well. And I know Taylor appreciates that. I was just talking to Jason DeLay about it when you guys got back from Charlotte, and he caught in Charlotte where you guys were dealing with the automatic ball strike, the ABS. And I was like, and DeLay, you know, obviously really good defensive catcher. He had experience catching. It was a who's who at Vandy, and he struggles a bit offensively. Like, he knows his value is receiving, it's handling a staff. And I asked, what was that like catching with the ABS? And he said, I felt useless. And that was a really hard word to hear from a guy that has made a career out of doing that. I'm curious. I mean, your thought on that, Taylor.
Totally. Although, Jack, I also caught with the ABS in Charlotte. Okay.
No big deal. Sorry. Yeah, my bad.
But yeah, you know, the one thing I've said is, like, when I'm done playing, I will love the ABS, because the one thing I did like about the ABS was you didn't get, you didn't get, like, the arguments with the umpires about ball and strike. And so that made the game faster. Like, I know it's a little thing, and it's crazy I say that, because Yerman Mercedes actually got thrown out in a game with the ABS on balls and strikes, which kind of blows my mind. But I believe that catching is the only position like it in all of sports. You know, I think quarterback is the exact same thing. Like, I'm not taking anything away from those guys. I'm not saying it's harder to do than anything else. I just think it's different. It's the most different aspect of any position in any sport. And I think you're taking away arguably the most important part of that aspect by using the ABS. But who knows what'll happen. I think that, I think everybody will adjust. Look, it's coming. So like at this point, guys need to get ready for it more than like fear of it, and more than, hey, what are we going to do when it comes? Because it is coming at some point. Yeah, it's sad though, because I'm the same way. Like it totally, one thing I think baseball has done to try, like I think the analytics has done, is it has relatively devalued most positions, right? Like most positions have become devalued due to the fact that I can devalue you by saying, hey, as a catcher, you only do this well. As a shortstop, you only do this well. There were a couple positions that you really hadn't devalued. There were two that I say, because even like relievers have been devalued. And I look at the devaluation of relievers, starting with Dylan Betances when he had the whole arbitration thing, right? Like that started this process of, if you're not a closer, you're going to be devalued there. There were two positions. It was starting pitchers and catchers. And I kind of think that like starting pitchers, you look at it, that's the opener comes in, right? Like you lose one, wins. The big thing that the starting pitcher had over everybody else was you threw more innings and you got wins. Wins are devalued now. You're not throwing 5 innings every time now. And then the catching aspect, there was really no way to devalue catchers. Basically, guys have stopped running for the most part, right? Like your stolen bases are down significantly from 20 years ago. And blocking, if you go ask teams, the difference, the run difference between a guy on first with 2 outs and a guy on second with 2 outs isn't high enough. I'd rather you try for the strike. I'd rather you attempt to get a strike than block that ball. So now receiving was incredibly important. The best receivers in baseball were the most valuable players in baseball behind the plate. Yeah. You're going to lose that. And that's sad to me. Like I hate that aspect of it. But look, at the end of the day, you're just going to create a new player. It's just going to be a new challenge for somebody. It's not like baseball hasn't changed before, but it is going to be something totally different behind the plate. I think you're going to see the best hitter on your team that's not playing in the field. Like that's who I'm going to put back there.
I mean, if you think about it, the Cubs would have left Schwarber back there.
100%. And I think they thought about that. I think if Schwarber doesn't get hurt, he's a catcher. Yeah. I think if Schwarber doesn't get hurt, you might see Wilson Contreras on another team and Kyle Schwarber's catching. Huh. But the other thing I'll say is like Schwarber would have been, first of all, Schwarber's one of the hardest workers of anybody I've ever met. Schwarber would have been fine.
The way he changed his physique in that one off season was insane.
Oh, dude, it's a joke. It's a joke. He's as hard of a worker as anybody I've ever met. But he also, like, one, he hits enough, but two, he would have been around a veteran staff. So like that's not quite as important to me as if he were on a team, if he were on the Kansas City Royals, it's going to go throw 4 rookies or 4 guys that are in there pre-arbitration. That's where you need the veteran. That's where you need Salvador Perez, right? Like, we talked about this with Logan O'Hoppe on the call up. Like he's going to start next year, and you probably threw to Logan, but like he's going to start next year for Los Angeles. He's going to benefit from the fact that
you've got a Tyler Anderson
guys that know what they're doing. The funnest game I've ever caught in my entire life. I shouldn't say that. So many people are going to be mad at me for that. One of the most fun games I've ever caught was might have been my first spring training, 2012. Scott Feldman came down to throw a game in Cubs in the minor leagues, and he called every pitch. I'm not going to say how he did it because it was incredibly cool to me, but he called every pitch, and it was so much fun. But I got to learn from a veteran. And like after every inning, I'd go to him and say, hey, like, why'd you do that? Why did we do this instead of that? And it led me to a point where Rob can attest to this, because I've done it with Rob, where one thing I believe as a catcher is, and this differs from a lot of guys, is that I tell guys at the beginning of the year, I don't care if you shake. I'm extremely different from a lot of guys. A lot of guys, like, if they put something down, they want it. I don't care. I want your pitch at 100%, not my pitch 80%. So, but what I do say is the only thing I'll tell you is I'm calling every pitch with a 2-pitch sequence. So if you're going to shake to something, you better have another pitch ready for the next time, whether you've thrown a strike or not. So when we get back in the dugout and Rob shook to a curveball, and I'll go, hey, why did you do that? Let me tell you why I wanted the fastball. You tell me why you wanted the curveball. And a lot of times, man, like that's like guys will look at me like, well, I don't know. But then you get guys like Rob that'll go, well, I went to the curveball because I saw this and this, and I wanted to do this. But that's an interesting aspect of catchers that you'll still see even with the ABS.
Right.
Yeah. I got 3 things that while you were talking, they all popped into my head. I'm going to rapid fire these off.
Yeah.
Sick.
Logan O'Hoppe gets called up. They're like, hey, you're going to dress, but you're not activated. And this guy, I don't know how well you guys like know. You said you talked to him, right?
No. We talked about him.
Oh, we talked about him. Dude, this guy, he shows up and he's like walking around the clubhouse like he's been there 3 years. And I'm like, okay, I like that vibe. He's
in a good way or in a bad way?
Very good way. Very good way. Like he's very calm. He's confident.
I'm gonna cut you off. I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to do it because one thing we talked about Joe Madden. One thing I praised Joe Madden on was talking about the levels of big leaguer and like understanding that when you go into a clubhouse that, hey, like the first time you go in, you're searching for yourself. You're searching for your life. Like, but you need to have the ability to have confidence. It is so hard. Rob was a high pick. Walking into that Chicago clubhouse was hard. Like,
it is.
Same thing in Los Angeles. So I'm sure that's all I'm saying here is like that is an incredible compliment to Logan to having the ability to do that.
No, I'm glad you explained it because if you didn't, it probably wouldn't make the story make as much sense. But he walked around like he's been there for a while. And I was like, okay, I like that because that's something I struggled with very hard. Because it's like, hey, I'm a big part. Like Rob's going to close games. Rob's going to do this. In 16, I'm a big part. 17, I have a great spring. I go to AAA. Brian Dunsing and Mike Montgomery are shoving. And so every time I went up, it was a filler guy. So I went from like, I have a huge role on this team to you're just kind of here until we're good and then you're gone. And like being able to mentally overcome that is tough. But so Logan walks in, they tell him to go down to the bullpen and sit. This guy brings his gear down there. This guy catches every single guy, tells the bullpen catchers to take a day off. He's like, I'm catching tomorrow. I want to get locked in. Like this guy could have been kicking his feet up, enjoying his first day in the big leagues. He's back there strapping up, blocking balls. Like I loved it. And then sure enough, as soon as I threw to him in the game, he's working his ass off for you. And I think he's going to be an incredible player. Number 2 was you guys need to find the video of me throwing to Schwarber this year in the big leagues because he took a daddy hack on a slider, fouled it off, and Dan Vogelback's on the top step. And I look at Schwarber and I'm like, because I mean, if he makes contact with this ball, it's 500 feet. He's like on his knee. I go, damn, like looking at him. Vogie's laughing at him. He looks at Vogie. They start laughing at each other. I rear up my next fastball at 95 at the knees for a ball. And it zooms in on Schwarber's face. He looks up at the radar gun and he goes, 95? Because he caught me for 4 years and I was like 91, 92. And it was just such a fun at bat, which he ended up hitting I think a triple off me. It was a one hop to the left fielder that he misplayed a little bit. And Schwarber ended up hitting a triple off of me. But it was just one of those where it's like Dan Vogelback I played with for 5 years is on my team. Schwarber, who I played with for 5 years, is on the other team. And we're all here in Philly, like competing against each other. I thought it was so cool. Last thing that I had on this was, do you feel at all the impact that you made on this game of baseball? Like you mentored Wilson, you mentored Schwarber, you mentored Dean Kramer and Kyle Bradish, who I trained with this offseason, and both of them said that they learned more from you than any other player they've ever played with. And they couldn't, like they said you were one of the best teammates, all that stuff. So there's plenty of other guys and everything, but do you feel like the impact that you have on baseball right now?
Here's what I'll say is that like I think that something that I started and you were there for it in 2020 when we went to the alt site and I was there with Adley. Something that I started to like learn was like, and my son was born in August. Like this is probably like coincidence, but not coincidence, but like it became just as cool for me to watch helping somebody get to the big leagues as it was for me to get to the big leagues. And I think that's where like my love, prior to that, I really wanted to go in the front office. I was like, when I'm done playing, I don't want to coach. I want to go in the front office. And then as soon as that happened, now I'm like, man, like I want to make a difference on the field. It's so fun to watch somebody else succeed. It's like giving presents at Christmas, right? Like you see that and you have that like, man, you had something to do with that. Maybe it's such a cool aspect. And, you know, I lucked out that I was around a bunch of really I've been in 3 organizations now, and all 3 of them had incredible talent. And thankfully I was able to be around them. And some of those guys were able to listen to some of the things I said, or able to talk to me, and we were able to learn from each other. But thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible compliment. You know, I've said for years, like, and, you know, Rob was there for this. Like, Rob, one of the things I said when I got put on the Phantom for the first time was like, the hardest thing to do was figure out how to compete. And that was the hardest thing, because my whole life I was a competitor. I was an athlete. And my competition, I probably never even told you this, but like what I did is I just decided that I was going to try to be the best teammate I could possibly be. Because when I got home at night, I could go, did I do that? That was my competition. And I had to answer to myself. And who better to answer to than yourself? Because I couldn't lie. I had to go, what was I? Like Rob remembers in Tennessee, dude. In Tennessee, I was catching every pregame bullpen, every bullpen during the game, every bullpen. Every time a pitcher needed warmed up, I was running down and doing it. I was hitting in between innings when I needed to. I was helping guys hit in the cage. It didn't matter. And I didn't care, because like I wanted everybody else to get better, because I wanted to be the best teammate I could possibly be. And, you know, like, this is the last thing I'll say, but like, you know, Rob, we talk about guys that have played for a long time, and like the most important question that you'll ask, the hardest question that I will ask you will not, or the easiest question I'll ask you will not be, who was the most talented player you played with? The easiest question I'll ask you is, who was your favorite teammate? And you'll be able to come up with that right away every single time. You know what I mean? And that's something that's really important for people at home to take. For me, is like, we care about being really good baseball players. We care about making a bunch of money. We care about all that. But at the end of the day, most of us care about being really good people. And I think that that's something that a lot of people just don't think is true.
Yeah. And I feel like some people say it, like when they're younger, they're like, I would rather be a good teammate or whatever, and they don't believe it. But until you play with somebody like you, like, I know I'm just like gassing you up right now, but until you play with somebody like you, where you kind of messed me up, because I thought what you did was normal. So I thought the guy who was not catching would go catch every pen, would catch the pregame pens, would go in with someone who's slumping and go hit with them in the cage, would take John Andrioli after a game because he slid too early once and help him learn where sliding would be most beneficial for him. I thought that was normal. So then I go to other organizations and it's not normal. And then I play with you again in 2020 and boom, it's normal again. And it's like watching Adley Rutschman follow you around the alt site everywhere you went and actively try to learn from you was one of the coolest things that I've ever seen.
Man, you know, and the last thing I want to talk about, because this will go great for our podcast, but like I've said, you know, I thought that up until I met Adley, I thought Javi was the most talented human being I'd ever met in my entire life. And I still like, look, Javi can start at 8 positions on any Major League Baseball team. He was going to be a first-round pick as a catcher. I truly believe that. There is not a better player that I have ever met in any aspect of the game. And you add to that the human being that he is as Adley Rutschman. And like, for those at home, you want to root for somebody, root for that guy, because not only is he going to be a stud, but he is a great human being.
Yeah. If his name was not Adley Rutschman, you would never know who it was. Like, he walks around like he's the 780th pick in the draft. Like, he just, and I'll never forget the alt site where I'm working out. I can't throw the second half of that year. And I just keep hearing that foghorn go off when I'm in the weight room. And I keep looking out the weight room door and Adley's trotting around the bases. Like, that kid just got into pro ball and he's mashing like AAA big league arms. And
yep.
The alt site for the Orioles was talented, man. A lot of those guys played in the big leagues for a long time, and it's still
and one of them is going to be a number 1 for a long time, I think, in Grayson. I think Grayson is going to be a number 1 for a really long time.
Well, and the top prospect in the game was there, right? Gunnar Henderson. I mean, like
look, Rob, like one thing I've said about Gunnar, like, this is the biggest thing I can give Gunnar, because biggest compliment I can give him, because this is the truth. Like, when Gunnar first got there, so Jack, Gunnar got to the alt site late. So Gunnar the Orioles did their alt site differently than most, which, depending on which side of the game you were on, either rubbed you wrong or rubbed you right. They had a lot of prospects, right? Like, we had very few veterans. Me and Rob, for a long time, outside of Brian Holiday, were the oldest and most veteran guys on that team. At that alt site. Most of the guys there were Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, those kind of guys. They brought Gunnar late. But when Gunnar showed up, and I remember talking to Ryan Fuller about this. So Ryan Fuller and Anthony Villa were the two hitting guys there. And when they first showed up, Gunnar got crushed, dude. Like, every I mean, he was probably, and he's going to kill me for saying this, but we'll talk about it again when we interview him. But, like, dude, I'm saying he was probably, he probably hit 100 through his first 20, 30 at-bats. And I remember looking at Ryan Fuller and going, dude, we are going to learn. We're going to find out who this guy is. I kid you not. By the end of the camp, the best player, he was the best player. Well, Adley was the best player there. He was the second best player there. And I almost feel like it was more impressive than Adley because he was a freaking high school kid that had just shown up. He had seen A-ball pitching. Now he's facing Rob Zastryzny, Grayson Rodriguez, Tom Eshelman, Dean Kramer. He's facing these guys that have had a lot of success in the big leagues. And he figured out a way to compete, and not only compete, but succeed. And he did it with relatively little help, man. Like, that was so impressive to me. I don't know if it was as impressive to you, but it was incredible to me.
Well, they had the locker rooms split. They had position players and pitchers. And, dude, the conversations that went on in the pitcher's locker room was, when Gunnar first got there, it was like, this kid's young. He doesn't stand a chance. He figured out how we were trying to pitch him. Probably took him, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
He figured out how we were trying to pitch him, and we couldn't sneak anything by him after that. Like, he could get his barrel to everything we threw. And I remember facing him last year in Norfolk. I was throwing him lefty, or is he switch or lefty?
He's a lefty.
Dude, I was throwing him lefty changeups. I was pulling everything out of the bag, and he was barreling them into the dugout. And he's just one of those hitters where you see him, and Chris and Javi are the two perfect examples. First time I saw them play, I was like, okay, this is different. And we didn't know how different at the time, but it was so different watching those guys play. Like, they were hitting, Chris was hitting 340, and he was frustrated because he had a bad at bat, his fifth at bat of the game. Like, there are levels to this, and you knew it immediately. Like, once I saw Adley and Gunnar, I was like, okay, they're different. I can't wait to see what they turn into. It's the same thing when I saw Dean throw for the first time. I was like, I don't know who Dean Kramer is, but the way the ball comes out, how smooth his delivery is, I was like, this guy's going to be able to repeat whatever he's doing. He looks really good, and he went and had an unbelievable year last year.
So the last thing, this will be the last thing I want to say, because we've had like what? I've had 3 organizations. You've had, I don't know, 8 now.
Yeah.
How many of it? 7?
I think this is my 7th. Yeah.
Okay. So, but we've had 3 of the same. And of those 3, all 3 of them in the minor league level were incredibly talented. Like, we saw Chris Bryant, Albert Almora, Kyle Schwarber, Ian Happ, that whole group, right? Like, of guys that was just, oh my gosh. And then we both were in Baltimore, where we got to see Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, Adley Rutschman, Dean Kramer, those guys. And Rob, just for you, like, you're in camp now, you're going to see an incredible amount of talent. You're going to see, like I've said, I don't think he's the best player I've ever seen, but I think he's going to be one of the best players in the history of the game. I think he's going to be one of the power hitters in the history of the game in O'Neal Cruz. Like, the dude is going to be an absolute monster. Yeah, you got an event you got to go to?
No. My wife's
modeling deal?
Let me decline that real quick. Sorry, now. All right, go on.
My wife just texted me and asked me when I was done, so we're both in the same spot. But like, it's crazy how I'll be interested to hear, like, I want to have you on again after spring training, because I want to hear your thoughts on, I'd love to break down the 3 organizations that we both played with and where you think all 3 of them ranked.
Yeah, no, I would love to do that. That's something I pay attention to a lot more now is like where the org is headed, like how they're developing these young guys. And you've already said it, I've only been here 2.5 weeks, and dude, seeing some of these young catchers, they have Indy, they have Henry Davis, I think his name is,
Yep.
and these guys are well beyond their years, and it's like it's so fun to see because yeah, this is now the third time that I've been in a situation like this where it's like I was with the Mets, and it's like the young guys are good, but it's like who cares because the big league team is unbelievable. Now it's like these young guys are the future, and like Pirates fans have to be excited because there are some dudes coming, and it's so impressive to watch.
Freaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some freaks.
Rob, last one for you from me, and then we always end it with Taylor saying, something nice about the gas. So listen, you just gas Taylor up. Taylor's going to gas you up at the tail end, but you mentioned different, right? Guys seem different. You just played with the most different human being in Major League history in Ohtani at the end of the 2022 season. So I just got to ask you,
player in the game right now.
Yeah, best player in the game, and it's like not close, I don't think, because he can do both. I mean, obviously everybody searches for that unique thing they can learn about Shohei Ohtani. Like, what's one thing you picked up about that dude?
He's very disciplined, and it's not that I don't think anyone knows that, but I don't know if everyone knows the level of discipline that he is. Like, he's there early every day. He handles the media, which is incredible to me because there's a media circus everywhere he goes. He handles it gracefully every single time. He gets his pitching work in on his own. He's got his translator with him, and they go through the drills. They have him film his drills so he can go back and rewatch himself throwing plyos into a wall. Like, this guy is immensely talented. We played with immensely talented guys, but both him and Trout was another one there. They never let that get to them. Like, they don't have down years because they train the same way every year. They're looking for new ways to improve. They're looking on things they don't do well to improve on. Like, Ohtani sped his delivery up a little bit. He added like 2 or 3 pitches over the course of the last 3 years. Like, this is a guy who's perennially an MVP, and he's always breaking down his own footage. He's always breaking down what he's doing right, what he's doing wrong, how he can physically get better to play this game. And I mean, we said this 100 times, but Taylor can tell you being a position player in the big leagues is so hard on your body. A catcher far more than anything else, but this guy throws 150 innings, plays a full big league season. Like, I don't think people understand how impressive it is. Like, I think Aaron Judge is one of the best hitters that has ever walked the face of this earth. But I would give the MVP to Ohtani because I don't know how that man.
Every time the dude's got a top 10 exit velo and a top 10 time to first base.
I mean,
he's got a top 10 fastball. Sorry.
Yeah. And I don't like to get in the middle. I know it's a big debate or whatever, and like they're both great players, so I don't want to be like this guy's better than this guy or whatever. But it's just, to me, if Ohtani does what he did last year, where he's a top 5 pitcher in the league and a top 5 hitter in the league, that should win the MVP until he cannot do it anymore.
Correct. He is the most valuable. He is the definition of the most valuable player in baseball, without question. Shohei. The other thing is, and I want to ask because I don't know, but I would like just assuming underratedly large human being.
Yeah, he's the only dude. Like, there's been 2. John Lester was another one where I watched John Lester on TV a bunch, but when I saw him, it's a lot bigger than you think. Ohtani is deceptively huge, but his jersey is tailored so well to where he looks like normal sized, and then he gets in the locker room and he stands up and he is wide, he is tall, he is strong. Like, it is very deceptive how big he is, and for him to move like that at his size is incredible to me.
Yeah, it is. All right, Jack. I'll wear out Rob here. Perfect. I think that something that's really impressive about Rob, man, is like, and it's gonna sound bad to start, but like Rob has seen adversity at all different aspects of his career. He's seen adversity on the performance side. He's seen adversity on the just straight up stuff side. He's seen adversity on the injury side. He's a guy that broke his foot twice in the same spot on the same way. Like, got hit with a comebacker and broke his same foot twice. This is somebody that, like I said, he was a high pick and had one of the most interesting routes to get to the big leagues because it wasn't easy. It was a guy that had to prove that he could do a little bit of everything, and he did that. And I think that Rob probably didn't even know that he needed to do that. He was a high pick. Most high picks know exactly what they got to do to get to the big leagues. This dude had to show 5 different things before he got there, and he did. the most impressive thing for me about Rob, I mean, like, and everybody will point to this, but dude, in 2016, he was on the NLCS roster as a rookie for a team that had not won the World Series in 108 years. And there was no fear there. And there was no fear of Joe putting him in the game. That is an incredible aspect to somebody's personality, somebody's perseverance. You know, I just think that the other thing is, like, from that, you then go to his next route. Like, that was great. That was all good and well. Go look at the next part of Rob's career. Rob's career didn't skyrocket from there, right? He went to the big leagues every few years. And then from 2020 to 2021 and 2022, he had to find his way back. And he had to figure out, how do I get back to the big leagues? And he did. And in 2022, he got back to the big leagues with one of the best teams in baseball and one of the most talented teams in baseball. And I think that that's just another testament to Rob and having the ability to overcome adversity. And we talk about that all the time and how important that is. But man, like, you were a testament to that. The last thing I'll say about Rob is, you know, you talked about me and having effect with guys. I don't know that I've played with a bunch of guys that had pitchers listen to them like pitchers listen to you. Pitchers listen to you, and it's not talking about pitching. It's talking about how you go about pitching. And that's just as important. How you go about it, how you show up every day. And I just really think that's a testament to you as a person. And it's a really cool thing to be able to wear on your sleeve at the end of the day.
Man, I appreciate you saying that. I got a little emotional thinking about it. I'm not kidding with you. If I retired today, I had a good career. Same with you. Like, actually great career, you know, top 1%, get to the big leagues, you made it. Like, but we always have such a higher level where we want to get to and stuff. So we always kind of feel like we're not doing what we need to do. Or those years I wasn't in the big leagues, I was like, man, I'm kind of a failure. And this year I walked into Push Performance where I was working out. I didn't really know anyone. I knew Dean and all them, but I didn't really know all the guys. And one guy in particular walked up to me and he goes, "You're Rob Zastryzny." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I've heard that you are hilarious. You're such a fun guy to be around." And I was like, "Thanks for saying that, man." And not 2 minutes later, another big league guy walked up and goes, "Hey, you're Rob Z, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Dude, I heard that you are such a good teammate," and like was like saying these things. That meant more to me than any other compliment I got. So when you say something like that, man, like, it genuinely means so much to me. Like, being on the World Series was great, winning the World Series and all that stuff is great, but like you said, like, it means a lot to me to be called a good teammate, or like, and I had learned from you and I learned from a lot of other guys, but that is so like, I'm getting emotional talking about it because it means so much, man. Like, it's something that
about being a good human being, dude. Like, at the end of the day, it's about being a good human being. You know, like, we can be good athletes all we want, but man, there's a different aspect to those dudes that want to be good human beings. And the teams that have good human beings that are good players are the teams that succeed.
Exactly. And they're hard to find. And so even being considered in that category at all makes me feel so good. But yeah, man, just, I think coming up with the Cubs was good for both of us because we saw the immense talent. We saw the best players in the world, but we also saw those guys who kind of stuck around. We saw those guys who maybe weren't the best player in the world, but they kept moving up the ladder. They kept getting chances. They kept getting all that stuff. And it's like for me, that was you. Is like, you were hitting 300, so you were a great player. But it was just like, if anything else, if nothing else, I want to be like that. I want people to remember me that way. Like, we affectionately call you the mayor of Iowa, but genuinely, like, the fans loved you. You were great with the fans. You were great with everybody. And that's just how I want to be remembered when I walk away from this game.
Sick. You know, and Rob, I do want to say this. Yeah. Jack, this is going to be a two-parter at this point, right? Like,
no,
we've
that's
gone an hour
fine.
and a half. But,
hey, this is so much fun for me sitting here just listening to this type of thing because, like, it's purely you. And I've gotten to know Taylor well. And, like, in an hour 20, Rob, like, you've opened yourself up to us. And it's really cool to see, like, two genuinely good human beings and teammates heaping love on each other. Like, that's a cool thing to experience.
Well, and like, this goes back to, like, that was something I think was created when we were in Chicago. Like, you know, you hear that, like, you know, the clubhouse is your family, yada, yada, yada. I don't doubt that. Like, I think there's a lot of clubhouses that, you know, your family. And a lot of times it just means that what happens in the clubhouse stays in the clubhouse. I grasp that. But it's something else to be said when guys are hanging out outside of the field. You know, like I won't name names, but in Chicago, there were plenty of times that guys had suites, that guys booked extra rooms, that guys booked dinners. And it wasn't, hey, I'm taking my buddy. It's, hey, I'm taking the whole team. We're going to dinner. You're coming up to my suite. We're all hanging out. That was an eye opener to me. Like, hey, this is how we do it. This is how it's done, and this is important. It's not just about playing baseball. Because in the big leagues, everybody's really good about playing baseball. You know, so yeah, this was fun. This was a fun one for me.
Yeah, no, I came on here, like I love to joke around. I love to do all that stuff, but it's like, I'll say these two examples. I get nervous when I haven't seen someone in a long time or talked to someone in a long time, because I'm like, it's just, you haven't seen him in forever. Pierce Johnson in El Paso, I hadn't seen the guy in about a year. I text him and he's like, hey, do you want to go grab breakfast or whatever in the morning? And we go, sure, we'll go on Thursday. Well, on Wednesday, I'm at the coffee shop. Pierce walks in. And so I go, hey, Pierce. I talked to him for about an hour about everything, his family, my family, baseball, his career, Japan, everything. And I would have told you it was about 10 minutes, but it was like an hour and 10 minutes of us talking, and it felt like 10 minutes. Same with this podcast. Like you just said, an hour.
Yeah, I was about to say, we're like an hour and a half in, and it's like I keep checking the clock. It's like, oh my gosh, like, dude, we've just been like chatting. Like, and for those at home, like, this is kind of what happens in the clubhouse, by the way. Like, this is it. Like, guys that know each other, guys that don't know each other. If me and Rob's, like, if I played against Rob next year, if I played against Rob next year and I was in Iowa and he was in Indianapolis, this is what would happen. We would go to the local bar after the game and we would be there until midnight. We wouldn't be there until they're taking shots. We'd be there at midnight because we're just talking like we're best friends. Because that's what happens on good teams and good people that play the game.
Yeah, could not agree more.
Love it. Everybody go talk to their wives. Rob, this was awesome, and we're going to get you back on and talk about the Pirates talent.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for having me on.